In August of the year 2000, 118 Russian sailors descended beneath the Barents Sea aboard a nuclear submarine called Kursk. Most of them believed they would return home within days. They never did. What followed became one of the deadliest submarine disasters in modern history. An explosion deep beneath the ocean floor crippled the vessel during a military exercise. The submarine sank to the bottom of the sea, and inside the darkness, some of the sailors survived. For hours, possibly longer, men trapped inside the ruined submarine waited for rescue while oxygen slowly disappeared around them. Families gathered above the surface searching desperately for answers. Russian officials denied the severity of the disaster. Rescue attempts failed repeatedly. And somewhere inside the black silence beneath the Arctic waters, sailors wrote final messages while waiting to die. Even now, the story of the Kursk remains one of the most haunting disasters ever recorded at sea, because the men inside the submarine did not die instantly. Some of them survived long enough to understand exactly what was happening. The Kursk was one of the largest and most powerful submarines ever built by Russia. A massive Oscar II-class nuclear submarine designed during the Cold War. Nearly 500 feet long, armed with cruise missiles and torpedoes powerful enough to destroy entire naval fleets. To the Russian Navy, the submarine represented strength, pride, a symbol that Russia still remained a global military power after the collapse of the Soviet Union. Inside the submarine, life operated beneath strict routine. Narrow corridors, metal walls dripping with condensation, artificial air recycled endlessly through the vessel. The sailors aboard Kursk understood the dangers of submarine service. Fire, flooding, mechanical failure, and the nightmare every submariner feared most, becoming trapped underwater with no escape. Still, many considered Kursk one of the safest submarines in the fleet. The vessel had completed previous missions successfully. Its crew was experienced, confident, professional. In August of 2000, Kursk joined a large Russian naval exercise in the Barents Sea north of Russia. Warships crossed cold Arctic waters while submarines simulated attacks beneath the surface. Military officials expected the exercise to demonstrate Russian naval power to the world. Instead, it became catastrophe. On the morning of August 12th, Kursk prepared to launch a training torpedo during the exercise. Inside the submarine, everything initially appeared normal. Then, at 11:28 a.m., a violent explosion tore through the vessel. The blast originated inside the torpedo compartment near the front of the submarine. Some investigators later believed leaking hydrogen peroxide from a faulty torpedo triggered the explosion. The force ripped through the forward sections of the vessel instantly. Sailors near the blast likely died within seconds. But the disaster was not over. Just over 2 minutes later, a second explosion erupted inside the submarine. This blast was enormous, equivalent to several tons of TNT. The shockwave traveled through the Barents Sea with such force that seismic monitoring stations detected it hundreds of kilometers away. Inside Kursk, entire compartments were destroyed, metal walls collapsed, fire spread through damaged sections of the submarine. The vessel plunged toward the seabed beneath the freezing Arctic waters. Then, everything went dark. Kursk struck the ocean floor nearly 300 feet below the surface. Above the sea, Russian naval commanders initially struggled to understand what had happened. Communication with the submarine had stopped. Repeated contact attempts received no response. At first, some officials believed the vessel had only experienced minor technical problems. But deep below the surface, survivors inside the submarine already understood the truth. The forward sections of Kursk had been obliterated. Fire and flooding consumed several compartments. But farther toward the rear of the submarine, a group of sailors remained alive. Investigators later concluded that at least 23 men survived the explosions initially. The survivors gathered inside the ninth compartment near the stern of the vessel. The compartment was cold, dark, filling slowly with smoke and carbon dioxide. Emergency systems failed throughout much of the submarine. The men understood rescue might take hours, possibly days. Still, many likely believed the Russian Navy would reach them in time. One officer named Dmitry Kolesnikov later wrote a message inside the darkness. His note became one of the most haunting artifacts recovered from the disaster. In shaky handwriting, he described the situation inside the submarine. "None of us can get to the surface." He estimated that 23 sailors remained alive after the explosions. Then he wrote another line. Writing blindly, the lights inside the submarine had already failed. The men sat trapped in total darkness beneath the Arctic Sea. As oxygen levels declined, conditions inside the compartment worsened rapidly. Carbon dioxide accumulated inside the air. Humidity increased. The temperature dropped lower. Some sailors may have suffered burns or internal injuries from the explosions. Others likely struggled to breathe while smoke spread through damaged ventilation systems. Still, they waited. Above the surface, Russian officials delayed requesting international assistance. That decision later became one of the most controversial aspects of the disaster. At first, Russian naval commanders insisted the situation remained under control. State media minimized the severity of the accident. Families received little reliable information. Some officials even suggested the crew had enough oxygen to survive for several days. But rescue operations immediately encountered serious problems. Russian rescue submarines struggled to connect with Kursk beneath rough sea conditions. Equipment malfunctioned repeatedly. Strong underwater currents complicated operations further. Hours passed, then more hours. And all the while, inside the darkness beneath the sea, the surviving sailors remained trapped. Families gathered at naval bases waiting desperately for updates. Wives, parents, children. Many watched television broadcasts searching for information, while officials released contradictory statements. Some family members begged the government to accept foreign rescue assistance immediately. At first, Russia refused. The delay cost precious time. British and Norwegian rescue teams eventually offered specialized deep-sea rescue equipment capable of reaching the submarine. But by the time international teams finally arrived, days had already passed. Inside the Kursk, conditions had almost certainly become unbearable. Investigators later believed the surviving sailors may have attempted using chemical oxygen cartridges designed for emergencies, but one cartridge likely reacted violently with seawater inside the compartment. The reaction may have triggered another fire, consuming remaining oxygen, filling the compartment with toxic gases. One by one, the surviving sailors disappeared into darkness beneath the sea. By the time divers finally reached the submarine, no survivors remained. The entire crew of 118 men was dead. The discovery devastated Russia. But public anger intensified even further, because many believed at least some of the sailors could have survived if rescue efforts had moved faster. The disaster exposed serious weaknesses inside the Russian Navy after years of financial collapse following the Soviet Union's fall. Poor maintenance, outdated rescue equipment, communication failures, political hesitation, all became part of the public outrage surrounding the disaster. Then came another controversy. Russian President Vladimir Putin faced criticism for remaining on vacation during the early days of the crisis. Television footage later showed emotional confrontations between grieving family members and government officials. One woman screamed at authorities, demanding answers about her son. Others accused the military of lying repeatedly throughout the rescue effort. Trust collapsed almost as quickly as the submarine itself. Eventually, Russian divers and international teams began recovering bodies from the wreck. The process took months. Inside the submarine, many scenes remained almost perfectly preserved by the freezing Arctic water. Personal belongings still rested beside bunks. Equipment remained scattered throughout damaged compartments. And inside the 9th compartment, investigators found Kolesnikov's final note. The message confirmed what many families had feared. Some sailors had survived the initial explosions, and they had waited in darkness while rescue attempts failed above them. That realization transformed the Kursk disaster from tragedy into something even more disturbing. Not simply a submarine accident, but a slow death beneath the sea while the world struggled to reach them. Years later, parts of the Kursk submarine were raised from the ocean floor during an enormous recovery operation. Images of the damaged vessel shocked the public. The front sections of the submarine had been almost completely destroyed by the explosions. Twisted metal surrounded shattered compartments where the disaster began. But even after investigations concluded, questions remained. Some Russians believed the official explanation concealed deeper failures. Rumors spread suggesting collision with foreign submarines, secret military cover-ups, or hidden details never revealed publicly. Most investigators ultimately concluded that a faulty torpedo triggered the catastrophe. But for many people, the emotional truth mattered more than the technical explanation. 118 men had entered the sea aboard one of the world's most powerful submarines, and somewhere in the darkness beneath the Barents Sea, they died trapped inside steel walls while rescue efforts failed above them. Perhaps the most haunting part of the Kursk disaster is not the explosions themselves. The idea of surviving the initial catastrophe, only to sit inside darkness, listening to oxygen disappear minute by minute. No sunlight, no escape, only cold metal, black water outside the hull, and the growing realization that rescue might never arrive. Even today, the Barents Sea remains cold and silent above the place where Kursk sank. The submarine itself has become part of history, but the memory of the sailors trapped inside still lingers beneath the Arctic waters. 118 men descended beneath the sea, believing they would return home. Instead, the darkness closed around them forever. And somewhere inside the silence of the ocean, the final hours of the Kursk still remain waiting in the dark.